On a night raid in Afghanistan, two men carry the same rifle, wear the same kit, and hunt the same target. But they are not there under the same law. If the raid goes wrong and lands on the front page, the United States can look the world in the eye and deny that one of them ever set foot in the country. And here is what unsettles even Delta. That deniable man used to be Delta himself. Now he works for the CIA, under an authority that gives him a freedom the operator beside him will never have. That authority has a name, Title 50, and the unit that lives inside it, the CIA's ground branch, is the one force even Delta Force treats with a careful, wary kind of respect. Not fear of losing a fight. Delta would not lose that fight. Something more complicated than that, and to understand it, we have to be precise about what ground branch is, because almost everyone gets it wrong. Start with the name, because the audience for this deserves the real one. Ground branch is not the CIA in general. It is not the analysts at Langley, not the case officers recruiting spies over coffee, and not the political action people who move money and influence elections in the dark. Ground branch is the land element of the agency's Special Activities Center, the paramilitary arm once known as the Special Activities Division. Inside that center sits the Special Operations Group, and inside that sit three branches: air, maritime, and ground. Ground branch is the one that walks onto the objective with a rifle. It is small, a few hundred paramilitary officers at any given time, and it is the pointy end of the entire agency, the men who do the things that never get admitted to. Their names are not published, their operations are designed to leave no American fingerprints, and their very existence is something the government prefers to keep vague. The country will eventually get its books and its movies about Delta. Ground branch is designed to leave nothing behind for anyone to write from. When people say the CIA has its own Delta Force, this is the thing they are fumbling toward, and it is both more and less than that. Now the part that actually matters, the part that explains the wary respect, and it is not about muscle, it is about law. A Delta operator works under Title 10 of the United States Code. Title 10 is the body of law that governs the Department of Defense, the military, the uniformed force. When Delta goes out, it goes out as a military unit, under military authority, inside the framework the armed forces answer to. Ground branch works under a different title entirely. Title 50, the law that governs the intelligence community and, crucially, covert action. And that one number, 10 versus 50, is the whole story. Because Title 50 unlocks something Title 10 cannot touch: deniability. Here is how it works, and it is worth getting exactly right. Under Title 50, the President can sign a document called a presidential finding that authorizes a covert action, an operation designed so that the hand of the United States is deliberately hidden. The legal magic of that finding is that it lets the government deny involvement, officially, on the record. The United States can conduct an operation and, if it surfaces, look the world in the face and say we were not there. That legal denial simply does not exist under Title 10. The two systems even answer to different overseers. A covert action under Title 50 has to be reported to the Congressional Intelligence Committees, often before it is ever carried out. A military operation under Title 10 is briefed to the Armed Services Committees, and frequently only after it is already underway. Different law, different watchdogs, different paper trail, and the seam between the two is exactly where the friction we are building toward lives. When the military acts, it acts as the United States, acknowledged, accountable, on the books. When ground branch acts under a finding, the country has prearranged the right to pretend it never happened. If you appreciate this level of precision, that this is a legal distinction and not a Hollywood one, subscribe, because getting it right is the entire point of this channel. Same rifle, same target, two completely different relationships with the truth. So think about what that latitude actually buys on the ground. Ground branch can operate in denied areas, places where the United States military legally cannot be acknowledged to exist. Countries where an American soldier in uniform would be an act of war, but a deniable officer is merely a problem nobody will admit to. It can run deniable direct action, sabotage, and targeted killing. It can go in first, before any war is declared, and prepare a battlefield the public will not learn about for years, if ever. Inside the government, this is sometimes called the third option, the space between a diplomatic note and an open invasion, and ground branch lives there. It is what a president reaches for when doing nothing is unacceptable, and sending an acknowledged army is worse. Picture a country the United States is not at war with, where a target is hiding. Send Delta in uniform, and you have arguably just committed an act of war against a sovereign state. Send a deniable officer, and if he is caught, the government shrugs and says it has no knowledge of this person. Same man, same skill set, but one version triggers an international crisis, and the other triggers a quiet denial. That is the entire practical value of Title 50, and by design, the military can never provide it. Delta is devastating, but Delta is a hammer the nation has to admit it swung. Ground Branch is a hand the nation gets to say was never in the room. And here is the first thing that genuinely unsettles Delta, and it has nothing to do with rivalry. Ground Branch is built out of Delta. When the agency needs paramilitary officers who can shoot, move, and operate at the highest level, it does not train them from scratch. It recruits them, already made, from the Tier 1 units, from DevGru, from Delta, from the Green Berets and Force Recon and the Pararescuemen. The most experienced, most capable operators in the American military are exactly the pool Ground Branch fishes in, which means the men across that line are not strangers. They are often the guys from the troop next door, the ones with the best reputations, who left the unit and came back wearing a badge instead of a uniform, carrying the same skills into a job with far fewer restraints. The men across that line are not a lesser force. They are Delta's own alumni, now holding a license the unit itself will never be issued. There is a quiet sting in that, past the legal envy. The agency does not merely borrow Delta's tactics. It takes the finished operator, the one the unit spent years and a fortune building, and puts him to work under rules the schoolhouse that made him still has to obey, and he no longer does. The crossing over even has a name inside the community: sheep dipping. It is the old term for taking a man out of his uniformed service, scrubbing the obvious military identity off him, and running him under civilian or agency cover so that, on paper and to the outside world, he is not a soldier at all. A sheep-dipped operator can do things a uniformed one cannot, precisely because the uniform is gone, and with it, the acknowledgement that the military is involved. The line between a Delta operator and a Ground Branch officer works less like a wall than like a door, and the best men walk through it in both directions across a career, which is exactly why the two worlds are so tangled, and why the tension between them is a family tension, not a stranger's. Ground Branch is only the sharpest edge of a much larger pull. The agency also runs a protective element called the Global Response Staff, which hires former Special Operations men by the hundreds to guard its officers and stations in the world's most dangerous places. Those were the contractors the public briefly saw on the night of the Benghazi attack. Between the staff officers of Ground Branch and the contract shooters of that protective wing, the CIA has quietly assembled an entire shadow military out of the exact men the uniformed unit spent a decade and a fortune training. Every year, some of Delta's most experienced operators look at that world, at the money and the freedom and the mission, and they walk toward it. Now the word in the title. Again, because this is not a one-time thing, it is a cycle that keeps returning, and the clearest modern version of it has a name too: Omega. In the wars after 2001, the CIA and JAYSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command that Delta answers to, fused their capabilities into joint hunter-killer teams, known as Omega teams. The agency brought the intelligence, the networks, the local proxy forces. JAYSOC brought the direct action muscle, the operators who could act on that intelligence in the dark. In Afghanistan, Omega teams worked hand in glove with CIA-run pursuit forces of local fighters, chasing insurgent leaders across the country. Those local units, the counterterrorism pursuit teams, were CIA-built and CIA-paid Afghan forces, and the Omega operators embedded to lead and enable them. The whole arrangement was engineered to run with almost no visible oversight, hunter-killer teams reaching across borders with a latitude no conventional force could dream of, and the combination was considered among the most effective in the entire war. These were not small missions. Omega teams took part in the hunt for the captured American soldier Bo Bergdahl, helped capture men who ended up in Guantanamo, and played a role in tracking and killing the American al-Qaeda propagandist Adam Gaddan. This is the machine at its most powerful. Delta-caliber shooters plugged directly into agency intelligence, operating under blended authority with almost no visible oversight. But here is what the recruiting posters leave out, and it is the honest heart of this whole story. When those two worlds operate on the same team, they grind against each other. Team veterans have described real friction on Omega missions between the military operators and their CIA colleagues. And once you understand the two titles, you understand exactly why. The men are elite on both sides. The authorities they answer to are not the same. A Delta operator lives inside a rigid structure, a chain of command, strict rules of engagement, and a hard accountability for every round he fires. The agency side plays a looser, quieter game, built around deniability and a different tolerance for risk. Put them shoulder to shoulder on a target and you have two of the most capable men on Earth, working the same objective, answering to two different rulebooks, and sometimes disagreeing hard about who is actually in charge of the room. One side is weighing the mission and the deniability. The other is weighing the investigation that lands on him personally. If a single round goes somewhere it should not. Both are right at the same time, and that is what makes it grind. And this is the real reason a Delta operator watches his footing, the thing underneath all the rest. On a blended operation, if it goes wrong, the two men do not share the consequences. The ground branch officer is covered by the deniability of Title 50. He can, in the coldest legal sense, cease to have been there. The Delta operator has no such shield. He is Title 10, acknowledged, accountable, on the books, and if a deniable operation turns into an incident, it is the uniformed man who is exposed to the investigation, the hearing, the career-ending question of what he was doing on an op the country wants to disown. He carries the training, the skill, and the same risk of getting killed on the objective. And on top of that, he carries a legal exposure the man beside him does not. That imbalance, invisible on the target but total on paper, is the quiet weight a Delta operator feels on every blended mission. It is not fear. It is the plain awareness that the man he trusts at his shoulder is playing the same deadly game with a very different safety net. The nervousness is not about who is deadlier. It is about who is left holding the bag when a mission that was designed to never have happened, happens anyway. You might ask why Delta does not simply operate under Title 50 itself when a job calls for it. The answer is that the two authorities are guarded jealously by two different halves of the government, and Congress watches the seam between them closely. The military occasionally does things that resemble covert action, and files them under a softer name, operational preparation of the environment, and every time it drifts toward the agency's lane, the oversight committees push back. That wall between Title 10 and Title 50 is maintained on purpose, not left standing by accident, so that no single organization ever holds the military's firepower and the agency's deniability in the same hand. Ground Branch gets to live on the covert side of it, and Delta never will. Step back and the pattern is older than Omega, older than Afghanistan. The marriage of agency intelligence and elite military shooters runs back through decades of American covert history. In Vietnam, a secret organization called the Studies and Observations Group, known as MAC-VSOG, ran deniable cross-border missions that blended CIA direction with the military's finest special operators, and it is part of the very lineage Delta itself was drawn from. The names keep changing. The Studies and Observations Group, then a long shelf of classified programs, then Omega, but the arrangement underneath never does. It keeps reforming because it keeps working, and it keeps generating the same friction because the underlying law never changes. Every generation of operators runs into the same seam between Title 10 and Title 50, and every generation, the agency reaches back into units like Delta and pulls its best people across the line into the deniable world. That is the again. Not a single event, but a recurring gravity, the covert side of the house forever drawing the finest direct action talent toward a freedom the uniform cannot offer. So here is the thing worth arguing about, and the comments are the place for it. Is that Title 50 freedom actually the better deal, or is it a trap, dressed up as a superpower? Because the deniability that lets an officer vanish also strips away the very things that make Delta what it is. The acknowledgement, the accountability, the certainty that your country will admit you were there and stand behind you if it goes bad. A Delta operator will never get to not exist. But he will also never wake up as a man his own government has decided, on paper, was never in the room. Tell me which side of that line you would rather stand on. And if you want to see the standard these ground branch officers were built to in the first place, the video on screen breaks down what actually makes a Delta operator before the agency ever comes calling.